didn't click on this video by accident. No, something led you here, a curiosity, an itch in the back of your mind that needs to be scratched. Maybe it's the name Mike Tyson that caught your eye, a name that sends chills down the spines of even the toughest men who have ever stepped foot in the ring. Or maybe it was something else, something deeper, a question that lingers in the back of your mind. What happens when even legends have regrets? What does it take for a champion, a man who has already conquered the world, to look back and say, "I wish I hadn't done that"? Because that's exactly what happened. A former heavyweight champion, a man who once stood at the pinnacle of boxing, has finally admitted what many suspected all along. He never should have stepped into the ring against Iron Mike Tyson. It wasn't a matter of skill, nor was it about strategy or even heart. It was something far more primal, something every fighter understands but rarely says out loud. Fear. But let's rewind. Let's go back to a time when Tyson wasn't just a name. He was an unstoppable force of nature. The 1980s were a different era in boxing, an era where champions were built from something tougher, something raw, something unbreakable. And at the center of it all, a young kid from Brooklyn was carving a path through the division unlike anything the world had ever seen. 19 fights, 19 knockouts. Every opponent who stepped up fell. Not just beaten, destroyed. Then came November 1986, a night that would forever be etched into boxing history. Trevor Berbick, a seasoned veteran, walked into the ring as the reigning WBC heavyweight champion. He was expected to give the young Tyson a test, maybe even take him into deep waters. But what happened that night was something far more brutal. In just 2 rounds, Iron Mike unleashed a storm of violence that left Berbick struggling to stand. Not just beaten, humiliated. That was the night Mike Tyson became the youngest heavyweight champion in history. 20 years old. A child by boxing standards. And yet, he was already a king. That night, the world realized something terrifying. Tyson wasn't just a fighter. He was something more. A force. A machine. A predator. One by one, challengers stepped forward, only to be sent crashing to the canvas. The WBA title. The IBF title. One after another, they fell until there was no doubt. Mike Tyson was the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. But even kings have challengers. Even predators face hunters. And that's where Larry Holmes enters the story. Holmes wasn't just any fighter. He was a legend, a man who had held the heavyweight championship for 7 years, a man who had shared the ring with greats. When he retired, he walked away as one of the greatest to ever lace up a pair of gloves. But time has a way of whispering dangerous things to men like him. It makes them restless. It tells them that they still have more to give. So in 1988, 2 years after his retirement, Holmes made a decision. He would come back. He would fight again. And he would do it against the most feared man in boxing, Mike Tyson. What happened next is the stuff of nightmares. From the opening bell, it was clear that this was not going to be a comeback story. This was not going to be a night of redemption. Holmes, the great Larry Holmes, a man who had once stood atop the boxing world, was systematically dismantled. 3 rounds passed, and each second felt heavier than the last. By the 4th, it was over. Holmes hit the canvas, and for the first time in his legendary career, he couldn't get back up. That night, Tyson didn't just beat Holmes. He erased him. And yet, years later, when asked about that fateful night, Holmes didn't hesitate. He didn't stutter. He didn't make excuses. He simply said, "I shouldn't have come out of retirement against him." Because he knew. He knew that stepping into the ring with Tyson wasn't just a fight. It was a gamble. And he lost. But then came the real confession. The one that would finally answer the question, why? Why would a legend, a man with nothing left to prove, risk it all against a monster like Tyson? The answer was as old as the sport itself. Money. It wasn't about pride. It wasn't about legacy. It was about the one thing that had lured so many back into the ring, so many past their prime, so many into fights they never should have taken. The paycheck. The payday. The price of one more shot at greatness. But the truth is, Holmes never needed to fight Tyson. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He had already cemented his legacy. And yet, the lure was too strong. The call too tempting. And the result? A night that would haunt him forever. Holmes would fight on, chasing something that was already gone. He would step into the ring against Evander Holyfield. Against Oliver McCall. He would fight until 2002, long past the days when he was at his best. But nothing would ever erase what happened that night in 1988. Nothing would change the fact that for one brief, brutal moment, he became another name on Tyson's hit list. And now, years later, the question remains, what would have happened if Holmes had faced Tyson in his prime? Would the outcome have been different? Would the Easton assassin have outboxed the young wrecking machine? Holmes thinks so. He believes that in his prime, he would have beaten Tyson. That the young destroyer wouldn't have been able to push him against the ropes, wouldn't have been able to land the same devastating shots. But that's the thing about boxing. There are no do-overs. There's only what happened. And on that night in 1988, what happened was clear. Holmes stepped in. Tyson made him regret it. And history was written. But there's more to this story. Much more. Because while Holmes may have regrets about stepping into the ring, Tyson himself carries demons of his own. Battles fought outside the ring that were even darker than anything inside it. And the truth? Even Tyson has regrets. Want to know what they are? You think you've heard it all, don't you? You think you know Mike Tyson, the ruthless knockout artist, the unstoppable force, the man who made legends crumble. You've seen the highlights, the devastating knockouts, the way opponents fell like dominoes under the sheer power of his fists. But let me tell you something, there's a side of Tyson you've never seen. A truth hidden beneath the chaos, buried under the victories, the titles, and the glory. And once you hear it, you'll never look at him the same way again. Because here's the thing about power, it's a double-edged sword. And for Tyson, the very thing that made him invincible inside the ring was the same thing that tore him apart outside of it. The destruction didn't stop at his opponents. No, it followed him home. It lived inside him. But before we get there, before we talk about the part of Tyson's life that even he wishes he could rewrite, let's go back. Let's go back to a moment when the world believed he was truly untouchable. It was the late 1980s, and Tyson had done what no one thought was possible. He had unified the heavyweight division. He wasn't just the champion. He was the champion. The youngest undisputed heavyweight title holder in history, feared by every man who dared to lace up the gloves. Promoters scrambled to find someone, anyone, who could stand in front of Tyson and survive. But there was a problem. No one could. They tried. Oh, they tried. Former champions, hungry contenders, veterans who had seen it all one by one. They stepped forward, and one by one they fell. Knocked out. Destroyed. Forgotten. And with every victory, something started to change. Tyson wasn't just winning. He was doing it so easily that people began to wonder, was he even human? Could anyone stop him? And that's when everything started to fall apart. Because here's what nobody tells you about being at the top: it's lonely. It's isolating. When you're a force of nature, a living legend, there are no equals. There are only people who want something from you. And for Tyson, the vultures had already begun to circle. It started small. Little distractions. Late nights. Bad company. Tyson had always been wild, but now he had money. Now he had power. Now he had people around him who didn't care about the fighter, only the fortune. And then came the biggest blow of all. The one loss that didn't happen inside the ring. Cus D'Amato. If you don't know the name, then you don't truly know Tyson. Because before the titles, before the knockouts, before the world knew his name, there was one man who saw the potential in a young, angry kid from Brooklyn. One man who took him in, molded him, guided him not just as a trainer, but as a father figure. Cus D'Amato wasn't just teaching Tyson how to fight. He was teaching him how to survive. But life is cruel. And just as Tyson was rising, just as he was beginning to take over the sport, D'Amato was taken from him. Gone. And in that moment, everything changed. Without Cus, Tyson was still a fighter, still a destroyer, but now he was alone. The man who kept him grounded, who reminded him that he was more than just a puncher, was no longer there. And when that anchor was cut, Tyson began to drift. That's when the trouble started. The bad decisions. The distractions. The people who saw a vulnerable young man with millions of dollars and a future that they could manipulate. Tyson was no longer just fighting opponents. He was fighting the weight of expectation, the emptiness left by the loss of the one man who truly cared about him. And then, in 1990, it happened. The night the world stopped believing in the invincible. Buster Douglas. It should have been just another fight. Another easy payday. Tyson was supposed to walk in, knock Douglas out, and walk out with his title still around his waist. That's what everyone expected. But Tyson wasn't the same man anymore. The fire, the hunger, it was still there, but it was buried beneath the chaos of his life outside the ring. He wasn't training the way he used to. He wasn't focused the way he once was. And Douglas came to fight. What happened that night in Tokyo was something nobody saw coming. For the first time, Tyson wasn't the hunter. He was the hunted. Douglas fought like a man with nothing to lose. He took the best shots Tyson had to offer and kept coming forward. Round after round, he pushed Tyson back, doing something that no one had dared to do before he fought him without fear. Then, in the 10th round, the unthinkable happened. A punch. A fall. A legend on the canvas. Mike Tyson. The unbeatable. The unstoppable. Beaten. And when the referee counted to 10, the world realized something terrifying. Tyson wasn't invincible. Tyson could lose. And if he could lose once, he could lose again. That was the beginning of the spiral. The scandals. The lawsuits. The accusations. The prison sentence. One by one, the pillars of his life crumbled. The money, the fame, it was all slipping away. And for a man who built his entire identity on being the baddest man on the planet, what happens when you're no longer the baddest? What happens when the fear that once surrounded you disappears? Tyson found out the hard way. The fights that followed weren't the same. The aura was gone. The intimidation wasn't enough. He fought. He won. He lost. But something was missing. And then came 1997. Holyfield. The rematch. The bite. By then, Tyson was no longer the cold, calculated destroyer of the ADS. He was something else, a man desperate to hold on to what he once was. And in that desperation, he did something that no one will ever forget. He bit. Not once. Not twice. He bit a chunk out of Evander Holyfield's ear. And in that moment, the world knew the Tyson they once feared was gone. The story of Mike Tyson isn't just about boxing. It's about pain. It's about regret. It's about a man who had it all and lost it, not because he wasn't good enough in the ring, but because life outside of it was even tougher. But here's the real question: does Tyson regret it all? Does he regret the choices he made, the fights he lost, the moments that defined his downfall? Maybe. Or maybe, just maybe, it all had to happen this way. Because today, Tyson is a different man. No longer the feared champion, no longer the knockout artist who made the world tremble, but a man who has come to terms with who he is, who he was, and who he could have been. The question is, if given the chance, would he do it all over again? That's a story only he can tell.